When it comes to the critical texts and the Vaticainus, all this stuff really stems from the Counter-Reformation, starting with the Jesuits and the Catholic Church.
When the Protestant Reformation was gathering momentum thanks to Martin Luther and other great Protestant leaders, Rome was desperate, obviously, to counter the Reformation.
And so, obviously, if the God of this world is behind the deception, there's going to be a counterattack, and that's what took place.
After more than 20 years of preaching the gospel of grace and denouncing the Pope as Antichrist, the world had been turned upside down again, and the authority of Rome was greatly diminished. But in response, the powers of darkness would not be silent.
Satan raised up individuals in the name of Christ, who then attacked those who were becoming true Christians.
This specific manuscript is the earliest, if not one of the earliest, correct?
No, it's the earliest complete manuscripts.
We also spoke with Dr. Scott McKendrick, the head of Western Manuscripts, about the comparison between Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus.
They're different also, or two ways actually, I'd say two ways. One is that Vaticanus does not have the extent of correction. That's a very critical difference. Sinaiticus is the most corrected Greek manuscript of the scriptures. The second is that Vaticanus now has a very strange appearance. When you look at it as a manuscript expert, although you know that people tell you that it is a 4th century manuscript, it actually looks like a 15th century manuscript. And there's one very simple reason for that, is that almost the entire text has been overwritten by a 15th century scribe. Not only that, he's added in 15th century decoration, titling, and so forth. So it has a very strange appearance.
Is it possible that the reason Codex Vaticanus has a strange and even newer appearance is that it may not be a truly ancient manuscript?
And the Sinaiticus wasn't even a legit manuscript.
Simonides claimed that Codex Sinaiticus was no ancient manuscript at all, but a modern work created by himself. Simonides wrote, "The real test of the genuineness of the Codex Sinaiticus is neglected. The public were assured that in May, Tischendorf was to be in London, armed with a portion at least of his great codex. I have waited in England, hoping to have the opportunity of meeting him face to face to prove him in error. But May has come and gone, and the discoverer has not appeared. Let the favorers of the antiquity of the manuscript persuade him to come at once and brave the ordeal, or else forever hold his peace." Yet despite the evasiveness of Tischendorf, most of the newspapers in England defended him and denounced Simonides as a fraud. Could Tischendorf's relationship with Rome have had something to do with it?
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us. Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if he told us.
And that's just one of the 50 surviving manuscripts, so no wonder why over 200 verses, especially in the book of Mark that you're trying to refer to, is missing. You clearly don't understand what you're saying, and you didn't understand what I said.
You're right. I guess I didn't understand. Okay.
Well, hey, bro, Colton, good job, bro.
Well, I'm not here to have an argument or nothing, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to work ideas out. I know, yeah. No, I know. That's why I hopped on here, man, because all of the debate stuff is stupid to me. Because here's the thing. When we're looking at the manuscript that I'm referring to, that you're obviously aware of what I'm talking about. As far as I know, I don't think it was cut out rather than there's just a blank section at the end. I don't know if you looked at the manuscripts.
No, it's not in the Vaticanus, but the thing is all the others, the 5,600, they're in all of those. So that's what I'm trying to say. But when it comes to the critical texts and the Vaticanus, all this stuff really stems from the Counter-Reformation, starting with the Jesuits and the Catholic Church.
The Reformation itself had begun over the issue of merchandising the souls of men through the sale of indulgences that were literally written licenses authorized by the Pope as pardons for sin. The indulgences were sold to pay for the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. This was the principal issue that compelled Luther and the rest of the reformers to speak out.
They all rediscovered that salvation wasn't of works. It was, as the Bible said, a free gift. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Rome didn't like that.
When the Protestant Reformation was gathering momentum thanks to Martin Luther and other great Protestant leaders, Rome was desperate, obviously, to counter the Reformation.
And so, obviously, if the God of this world is behind the deception, there's going to be a counterattack, and that's what took place.
After more than 20 years of preaching the gospel of grace and denouncing the Pope as Antichrist, the world had been turned upside down again, and the authority of Rome was greatly diminished. But in response, the powers of darkness would not be silent.
Satan raised up individuals in the name of Christ, who then attacked those who were becoming true Christians.
But Counter-Reformation is definitely Rome's plot to destroy the Protestant Reformation.
What happened next was as if the bowels of hell itself had opened and spat forth the most dreadful and wicked society ever assembled. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul warned that evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. This was certainly true of the progressive efforts Rome put forth to fight against the teachings of the Reformers and the widespread publication of the Word of God. In 1540, just 1 year after England had published the Great Bible, Pope Paul III would commission a new order in Rome. Their purpose was to specifically combat and, if possible, overthrow the Protestant Reformation.
When Rome saw the consequence of the Word of God being translated so that the people could understand without the priests, they had to meet this with some sort of opposition.
This new company company of priests was founded as a military order by a former Spanish soldier named Ignatius Loyola.
Ignatius Loyola, actually his name was Inigo Lopez, born in Spain 1491, has become known as the founder of the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus. Without question, the major group of individuals who throughout history have played a significant role in an attempt to bring the separated brethren back to the mother of all churches.
The term separated brethren is a reference to Protestant heretics who are to be reunited with Rome by whatever means necessary.
I think the key here to me is that we're agreeing that this specific manuscript is the earliest, if not one of the earliest, correct?
No, it's the earliest complete manuscript.
Right.
So when it comes to the actual letters and the fragments of letters, we have older ones.
Okay.
So if there are earlier manuscripts with them in there, then who the hell cares if the earliest whole manuscript doesn't have it? As I told you, the Vaticainus has 5th century scribe writing written on top of the original text.
We also spoke with Dr. Scott McKendrick, the head of Western manuscripts, about the comparison between Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus.
They're different also, or two ways actually, I'd say. Two ways. One is that Vaticanus does not have the extent of correction. That's a very critical difference. Sinaiticus is the most corrected Greek manuscript of the scriptures. The second is that Vaticanus now has a very strange appearance. When you look at it as a sort of manuscript expert, although you know that people tell you that it is a 4th century manuscript, it actually looks like a 15th century manuscript. And there's one very simple reason for that, is that almost the entire text has been overwritten by a 15th century scribe. Not only that, he's added in 15th century decoration, titling, and so forth. So it has a very strange appearance.
Is it possible that the reason Codex Vaticanus has a strange and even newer appearance is that it may not be a truly ancient manuscript? The earliest recorded date for Vaticanus is 1475 AD, when it was first entered into the record of the Vatican Library. The manuscript had formerly been rejected by Erasmus and the Reformers because they believed it was corrupt. Yet somehow, the warnings of the Reformation were completely ignored by Tischendorf and the scholars who supported him. They all embraced Vaticanus without questioning its authenticity or considering that it may have been one of Rome's many historic forgeries.
And the Sinaiticus wasn't even a legit manuscript.
Simonides claimed that Codex Sinaiticus was no ancient manuscript at all, but a modern work created by himself and 2 other Greeks in 1840. While Tischendorf was in the midst of enjoying his fame, the story of Simonides began to be published in the London newspapers.
Simonides!
Needless to say, Tischendorf was furious.
Schweinhund! Idiot!
What followed would be a public debate that would continue in a variety of London newspapers for the next 2 years. In July of 1861, a publication called the Literary Gazette reported that, "We understand that in literary circles, a rumor prevails that the manuscript now publishing by the Russian government under the direction of Mr. Tischendorf, purporting to be a manuscript Bible of the 4th century, is not an ancient manuscript, but is an entirely modern production, written by a gentleman now alive, who will shortly take measures to establish his claim to the authorship. The manuscript is known as the Codex Sinaiticus and has attracted a large amount of attention throughout Europe. Should the rumor prove to be correct, as we believe it will, the disclosures that will follow must be of the greatest interest to archaeology."
In his letter, Simonides says that the controversy began over Codex Sinaiticus when he first saw the manuscript in Liverpool in 1860, and then it was the following year that the newspapers got hold of the story. So this story first appears in 1861, but Simonides did not publish his side of the story until 1862, and the only reason he did so is because he was drawn in to the conflict by 2 of the prominent scholars at that time.
The 2 scholars in question were Samuel P. Tregelles and Fenton John Anthony Hort. Tregelles and Hort believed Sinaiticus to be real and took sides against Simonides almost immediately. Tregelles wrote that the story of Simonides was as false and absurd as possible. In response, Simonides defended his argument as published in the Guardian newspaper in September of 1862, where he said, "When, about 2 years ago, I saw the first facsimiles of Tischendorf, which were put into my hand at Liverpool by Mr. Newton, a friend of Dr. Tregelles, I at once recognized my own work, as I immediately told him." In the book Codex Sinaiticus and the Simonides Affair, author J.K. Elliott confirms that Simonides spoke of his authorship to a man named J.E. Hodgkin in 1860, and in a letter to Sir Thomas Phillips on August 2nd, 1861. Simonides claimed that the manuscript had not been created with any intention to deceive, but was intended by himself and his uncle as a gift to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia. To prove his claims, Simonides challenged Tischendorf to a public debate, yet Tischendorf refused to take part. About this, Simonides wrote, "The real test of the genuineness of the Codex Sinaiticus is neglected. The public were assured that in May, Tischendorf was to be in London, armed with a portion at least of his great codex. I have waited in England, hoping to have the opportunity of meeting him face to face, to prove him in error. But May has come and gone, and the discoverer has not appeared. Let the favorers of the antiquity of the manuscript persuade him to come at once and brave the ordeal, or else forever hold his peace." Yet despite the evasiveness of Tischendorf, most of the newspapers in England defended him and denounced Simonides as a fraud. The attacks were almost fanatical and often unreasonable. Could Tischendorf's relationship with Rome have had something to do with it?
Okay. I get what you're saying now.
Man, I am so glad, Colton. You don't realize how happy I am that you understand. Because people don't freaking listen to me, man. They're not listening to what I'm saying. They're just so focused on what they're going to say next. They're not paying attention to what I'm saying.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I haven't heard that argument. That's my thing is like, I've looked at the manuscripts side by side of each other, like I was saying earlier, and the other gospels have that section as well. But you bringing that point up, you know, kind of conflates with what I've been thinking. So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on, man, you know?
All right, so here's the simple answer, Colton. Read the KJV.
I do.
And if you want to read other translations for context and getting a better wording, do it. I have ESV, Amplified, NIV, NLT, Oxford. I got them all. But my foundation is rooted in KJV because I'm an English speaker and I'm going to focus on the most accurate English translation. Do you want to go into why KJV is the most accurate translation?
Yeah, we can go into that because I have some disagreement on that, I would think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people poo-poo on KJV these days. I don't understand.
Go for it. What's your argument for it?
Well, if you could kindly mute up.
Yeah.
So the reason why I don't understand why people poo-poo on KJV is because growing up, I went to a Baptist private school, and they are KJV only. Now, I was not a big fan of KJV only, especially as a kid, because this old English stuff is like, I don't understand what they're saying. I don't even know what I'm memorizing. But regardless, they were so adamant on putting this importance on KJV. And then as I got older, I started to learn about these little things here and there about KJV. But one thing I'd like to share with you so I don't bore you to death is the process in which KJV was actually translated. Because KJV, King James, somebody went to him and said, look, we need to come up with a translation that everyone can agree on. Because the Geneva translation, there's a particular verse in there that says, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against darkness and principalities. But the way that the Geneva Bible translated it was, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against ruling powers of the world.
Let's look at Ephesians 6:12 in the Geneva Bible. King James' distaste for the Geneva Bible was not caused by the translation of the text into English, but rather the annotations in the margins. He felt strongly many of the annotations were very partial, untrue, seditious, and savoring too much of dangerous and traitorous conceits. The Geneva Bible remained the most popular text for personal use even after the publication of the new official translation commissioned by King James in 1611. In frustration, James finally outlawed the Geneva Bible in 1616. For the most part, Ephesians 6 is very similar to what we are used to seeing in the translations today, with one big difference. In the King James, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now let's look at it in the Geneva Bible. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, and against the worldly governors, the princes of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness which are in the high places. Is this saying the worldly governors are the princes of darkness of this world? Or is this saying the worldly governors is one entity we battle and the princes of darkness of this world is another?
So they're trying to put this negative focus on the monarchy and the ruling powers, which is not what the scripture was saying. So there's all this contention between the Protestants and the Catholics. So they have a 53 member group that is tasked with translating this Bible, but only 47 of them were able to come and get together. But what they did was they broke up into groups of 7, and then they took segments of the Bible and they all each individually translated it based off of the received text, all of the Masoretic texts that they had prior. So like I was saying, over 1,000 years from this place, that place, and this place, all different languages. They're taking an amalgamation of all this and then translating it individually. And then after they translate it, they look at it as a group and come to a agreement amongst those 7 people before they round robin it off until they do it with the entire Bible. But then it didn't just stop there. They would send that final translation to all of the bishops so that they can read it and make any comments on what they would think is wrong or correct. And then KJV was published. There is not a single translation to date that follows this type of rigorous methodology. So you can rest assured that when people say KJV is the most accurate translation, yes, it is the most accurate translation, hands down. Also, second point is that most of the newer translations are based off of the critical texts, the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus.
Okay. I think you can argue that the King James expresses the meaning of what's being said better than any other translation. I don't think when it comes to the specific words, and I don't know exactly which translation it's called, but there's a specific translation that goes into exactly what the specific word means instead of the phrase itself. So I think as of like getting a larger picture.
No. That is what KJV is. It's a word for word. Now, when it comes to ESV and the KJV, there are some disagreements on certain words, and ESV is arguably the most accurate Greek translation. But no, what you're saying is incorrect.
Give me like some specific examples, because or I can give you some if you'd like, but.
Well, so one example that I gave the round to ESV was a passage that had to do with bronze or copper.
Today we're diving into translation wars, KJV versus ESV. I joined a TikTok live that my brother Dion the Bible guy was in the other night, and they were talking about finding brass in mountains. Nathaniel the Baptist, that was the live. At first I had no idea what they were talking about, but apparently Dion was saying that it must be a mistranslation on KJV's part. But before we dive in, let's read the passage at hand. A land wherein thou shalt eat bread without scarceness, thou shalt not lack anything in it. A land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills thou mayest dig brass. Deuteronomy 8:9. So first things first, I wanted to look at the original Hebrew text, and as you can see, the word translates to copper, not brass. But here is the nail in the coffin. There is no way it could have been brass, because apparently brass is a metal alloy, which means that it is not a naturally occurring element. So it looks like this one goes to my brother Dion the Bible guy. It's nice to meet you, Nathaniel. I grew up Southern Baptist, so I'm sure our theologies would be very simpatico, the autistic Christian out.
This was a while ago. It's like a couple years ago, so I'm drawing a little blank here. But basically, what it was ESV had the more accurate translation of the word, because the other word in KJV is a word that is not possible to be mined.
Yeah. So you're saying that word by word is more accurate in the King James than in the newer translations?
Than the ESV, because the ESV is based off of the critical text. It's not that its translation is bad, it's just a translation of a bad source.
Okay.
So that's why
if it's based on the critical text, then I don't see what the problem would be.
That's the problem, because it's based off of the critical text. The Vaticanus has over 200 verses missing, and the ESV has 16 verses missing. So there's missing verses.
Okay.
Maybe not the entire.
They're going off of two different sources.
Yeah, maybe not the entire section of the end of Mark.
Okay. What do you think as far you talked about the Vaticanus and the other, what does that date to?
Sinaiticus?
Yeah.
The Sinaiticus is a product of the 19th century. It was written sometime in like 1840 something by Constantine Simonides, and then it was discovered by Constantine Tischendorf when he was sponsored by the Vatican to go and look for an older manuscript. And then he conveniently returns with an older manuscript. I mean, that in itself is bullshit. And then the story that he gives, that he saved these manuscripts from the fire because these monks were using it as fuel for the fire. Come on, man. That's bullshit. There was a 4-year debate between Constantine Simonides and Constantine Tischendorf, but just like today, how the legacy media will squelch the real truth and then force feed lies to the people, guess what? Tischendorf had all the financial backing from the Vatican, and the Vatican, they had plenty of resources. So Constantine Simonides and his story, and even people's awareness of this to this day, not many people know. They just gaff it off as, oh, it was just all a hoax and he was fabricating witnesses. No, there was an actual witness at the very monastery that he wrote it and corroborated with what he he was saying. There's actual letters of it published in the newspapers, because it's not like today where you could just post a video on TikTok for a video response. These people had to send letters into the newspaper, and they had a public debate. And the one time Constantine Simonides challenged Tischendorf to come out in the public and publicly debate the matter, he never showed up. He was a no call, no show. And then it just got swept under the rug by the legacy media. So that's why you don't know about it.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not aware of the situation you're referring to. But so which route exactly do you find more credible? Is it like the route of the Catholic and the Vatican and their translations, or by the Septuagint? How do you feel about the Septuagint? Let me ask you that.
Oh, damn it, he left. I was just taking a piss. Shit. Anyways, I'm gonna reset the live.
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us. Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if he told us.